Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats as we'll be starting the program shortly. May I request you switch your phones to silent mode. As part of the safe management measures, please keep your mask on at all times, except when rehydrating, and refrain from intermingling between tables. Thank you. Mr. Ho Wing Yu, Chairman of the Singapore Maritime Foundation, members of the SMF Board, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Singapore Maritime Foundation, a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us at the SMF New Year Conversations, previously known as the SMF New Year Cocktail Receptions. I am Muhammad Ishaq, a proud Maritime One scholar, and I'll be your MC for this evening. Before we start, I would like to remind everyone of the safe management measures again. Please remain masked except when rehydrating, and please refrain from intermingling between tables. Thank you for your cooperation. For nearly 2 years, we have lived under rather unusual circumstances because of COVID-19. Yet, the maritime industry has responded to the challenges with resilience and resourcefulness. As we gradually emerge from COVID-19, let us hear from the 5 industry leaders on the key lessons learned and new developments that we can look forward to.
The past 2 years of learning to live with COVID-19 has been challenging, but maritime has remained relevant and resilient. This can be attributed to the close cooperation between the public and private sectors, augmented by a skilled, committed, and resourceful talent pool that has kept the industry moving ahead despite tremendous challenges. The Singapore Maritime Foundation, as a strategic conduit between public and private sectors, has been stepping up in its role to strengthen Singapore as a leading international maritime center and to develop talent to drive the transformation of the industry.
It's been a privilege to be associated with SMF for 8 years and for the past 6 years as chairman. Shipping is a collegial industry, and Singapore is a particularly closely networked community. The public sector works with the private sector, and private sector players know each other and work well together on common issues, such as when key players recently rallied to form a global decarbonisation centre here. The Singapore Maritime Foundation perfectly embodies that spirit, public and private working hand in hand, addressing industry needs and connecting players on topics like talent pipeline and decarbonisation. It's hard to talk about highlights in the context of the rough couple of years we've been through with COVID, but it has always impressed me how many initiatives and connections that SMF is working on at any given time. Even during a pandemic, SMF managed to host a conference, complete a decarbonisation report, it raised the number of scholarships awarded, set up career fairs, and arranged a digital challenge. Such actions have helped to position Singapore as a leading maritime hub, and I'd like to extend my heartfelt thanks to the team for their hard work and to all our partners from industry, the unions, MPA and shipping associations that have worked to maintain Singapore's standing. Speaking with my business hat on, it's why we have found this a great place to anchor our group. Please continue to help SMF as you have been doing, and please stay safe.
Maritime is an industry that is rapidly transforming, embracing the environmental, social, and governance agenda, and using technology to accelerate towards a digital future. Successfully navigating the transformation means enhancing the core tenets that attract and anchor world-leading companies to Singapore, and offering new value propositions so that they can use Singapore as a springboard to connect with the global marketplace, create innovation, and nurture a talent hub.
Maersk has been active in Singapore for almost 50 years. Today we call Singapore our home away from home. Basically our presence here is built on 3 pillars. The first pillar is competitiveness. The fact that we here in Singapore have competitive rules and attractive tax system for shipping. This combined with ease of doing business and access to a cluster of shipyards, maritime services, etc. The second pillar is stability. We have a government here that pursues a consistent and long-term maritime policy. And that policy is executed by competent institutions, not at least MPA. This is a very attractive fact of Singapore. Then we have rule of law and zero corruption, and that's also very important to Maersk. The third pillar, the last pillar, is access to talent. Access to Singaporean and international talent that has an international mindset, that are well educated. That is the foundation for Maersk's presence here in Singapore. Furthermore, Singapore can help the industry with addressing what is probably the biggest challenge in our lifetime, decarbonization. Singapore is a huge flag state. It's a significant bunkering hub, and with a very diverse maritime ecosystem, Singapore is in an excellent position to play the role as a maritime sandbox for testing of new technologies.
Having invested in building a comprehensive and complementary ecosystem, Maritime Singapore is now taking the next leap forward, offering more innovative services to distinguish itself in a world where competition is keener than ever before.
To set ourselves apart from the competition and enhance our name as a global hub port, PSA Singapore will need to do more than a go-to port for connectivity, service excellence, and reliability standards. It needs to move from a node to a network. It needs to be an ecosystem that addresses cross-border in an integrated supply chain and feature all three flows of physical, regulatory, and financial. Thus, besides providing good quality service to the container vessels that come alongside our berths in Singapore, we need to provide cargo solutions to cargo owners. What do I mean by that? Over the last few years, PSA has gained traction in understanding BCO's pain points, and we have been able to design bespoke and varied solutions to value add and address the needs of BCOs across different verticals. PSA Cargo Solution was formed 3 years ago to offer a unique combination of POP Plus initiatives and a greater range of physical and digital supply chain services that neither traditional port operators nor 3PLs or 4PLs offer. One of which is the new strategic corridor, the International Land Sea Trade Corridor, with both rail links between Chongqing and Qingzhou, as well as with shuttle services between Qingzhou and Singapore. Shippers can now enjoy through bill of lading directly from Chongqing to any parts of the world via the Singapore hub. Apart from physical solutioning, we have also engaged the maritime logistics community and key stakeholders in collaboration to build a synergistic digital platform and a supply chain ecosystem of the future. Moving forward, cargo solutions will feature prominently in our next generation port at Tuas, where we envisage it will not just be a mega port. We envision that Tuas supply chain ecosystem will work intrinsically with cargo solutions in both physical and digital forms.
For the past years, we are actually preparing and transiting to shipping 4.0, in my view. This is still a big question mark. So what is the future of shipping? Do we already know all the pieces required beyond digitalization and decarbonization? How autonomous will shipping be? What energy will propel ships in the future? So this is further accelerated during the COVID pandemic, where contactless and remoteless operations do help balance efficiency and public health risks. And we can see already that the effects of climate change have also never been felt more severely than before. And it has triggered a lot of global action, such as what we've seen in the recent COP26 and at the national levels. So I'm really excited about what is it to come. Look at, first, innovation. Through the ecosystem, Pier 71 and initiatives like the Smart Port Challenge, we have seen many companies and startups blossom. Look at Skylab, Glee Trees, EduField, and Performance Rotors. They continue to do well, and with some even having expanded their operations overseas. The next, second topic is really about decarbonization. Now we have set up the Global Centre for Maritime Decarbonization. It comprises MPA and 6 founding industry partners. Together with the industry, we develop solutions across the value chain. And of course, there's also the MESD, Maritime Energy and Sustainability Development Centre of Excellence. Adding together as an ecosystem, we can help spur the movement to help develop innovative and sustainable solutions. Third key point, digitalization. Telemedicine technology is available to provide prompt medical care to seafarers. Now we need to overlay physical connectivity with digital connectivity, such as the Digital Port at SG and Digital Oceans. And we are very excited about these developments moving forward. Shipping is really at yet another inflection point. We need to navigate through key topics beyond maritime. We need to think climate change, we need to think technologies, digitalization, supply chains, pandemics. And these are all global topics affecting shipping. So I think we all need to get ready for Shipping 4.0 and find a real solution in the next few years.
Over the past year, the Singapore Maritime Foundation has been gearing itself to support the industry as it navigates the next inflection point. It stands ready, as it has before, to be a trusted partner between government and industry, and to create pathways and platforms to grow the maritime ecosystem.
Singapore has been a pillar of strength for global shipping companies providing excellent maritime services. Its reliability, its resilience have been tested and proven time and time again, including during the recent pandemic, facilitating crew change and seafarers' vaccination. With Singapore as our corporate HQ, PCL and the Quad Maritime Group have certainly benefited, and we appreciate the work of the relevant agencies, industry players, and partners to continually make business happen. Since its founding in 2004, Singapore Maritime Foundation, SMF, has established itself as an effective conduit between the public and the private sectors. The leadership never rests on its laurel, each term bringing new vigor, new energy to drive maritime ecosystem competitiveness. Taking over as the chairman of SMF, I'm excited to build upon the stellar work of my predecessors and shape SMF's contribution to the industry. Today, maritime is on the cusp of another wave of transformation, and I'm convinced that Singapore has an important role to play in a new maritime world and global supply chain. And SMF will do our part in Maritime Singapore to respond to these changes. At the heart of this transformation, it's people and talent. In the years ahead, SMF will make talent a key centerpiece of our work. That means attracting talent, engaging talent, and growing talent. Maritime Singapore Reimagined is a vibrant talent and knowledge hub, tapping on our tremendous educational and skills infrastructure, commercial marketplace, and a growing maritime innovation ecosystem. Our industry is operating in a more complex global environment, and the ever-evolving COVID-19 pandemic has catalyzed some mega trends that were already underway. Trends such as digitalization, decarb, sustainability, all have gained substantial momentum and are influencing our needs for manpower, new competencies, and skill sets. These are significant shifts that Maritime Singapore can make important contributions to, and SMF will step up on engagements to stay attuned and involved in the industry's evolving talent needs. In addition to talent, we will also focus SMF's work around the themes of connectivity and innovation to ensure Singapore's linkage to the whole global maritime industry and continue to strengthen Singapore's position as a leading international maritime centre. I'm convinced that for Maritime Singapore, the best is yet to come. SMF will work closely with our Maritime One partners and the industry to maximize the collective impact of our work as we navigate the new world before us and continue to co-create a vibrant and dynamic Maritime Singapore.
Singapore's maritime heritage dates back 700 years, but our first modern container terminal only came online in 1972. That year, Singapore welcomed our first container vessel, the DNV-Menon. Today, 50 years later, Singapore is a global hub port and international maritime centre. The next chapters will be spurred on by technology and sustainability, and it is talent that will drive that transformation. SMF, as a conduit between the public and private sectors, and as a connector of the maritime ecosystem, will play its part to support Singapore's transformation by collaborating with the industry and by drawing passionate and committed talent to write the next chapters of growth.
Maritime Singapore has undergone significant development from 1972 to where we are today. With the industry at an inflection point, I eagerly anticipate what the future holds and the role that Singapore can play. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite SMF Chairman, Mr. Hor Wing Yew, to deliver his welcome remarks. Mr. Hor, please.
A very good evening. Ladies and gentlemen, great to see all of you here. I'm very happy to welcome all of you to the Singapore Maritime Foundation New Year Conversations. Let me take my mask off first. This is a little bit of a new practice, but we'll get it right. Right, in January every year, SMF has the honor of hosting Maritime Singapore's first gathering of the year. It gives us an excellent opportunity to take stock, to reflect, and to look ahead at new horizons. This New Year Conversation event has been an annual tradition of SMF since its inception almost 20 years ago, and I'm very honored to be able to continue it. Looking back at the last 2 years, where the world faced tremendous challenges from COVID-19 pandemic, we are making proud of the critical role that the maritime industry has played. We displayed resilience, resourcefulness, and many maritime professionals, both on shore and at sea, going the extra mile to keep supply lines running, global trades flowing. And here I would like to make a special mention of our seafarers, of their invaluable contribution and sacrifices in no small measures. With uneven economic recoveries around the world and the new Omicron variant spreading very fast, latest report of 2 million cases last week on the average, just in 1 week, I think it will not be surprising we'll continue to see pretty testing times for 2022. COVID-19 has caught us on the back foot and it brought to the forefront pertinent issues which were left in peripheral vision. Issues such as digitalization, employee well-being, and our shared responsibility towards the environment. There's a much higher consciousness of being better stewards of the planet, and we want to pass on to the future generations a world that is better than the one that we came into. From the floor of the United Nations to corporate boardrooms across the world, countries, companies are responding to this defining cause, devising pathways, instituting concrete actions to become better, greener, and more sustainable. COVID-19 has also made many countries be more conscious about resilience, be it food resilience, business resilience, or supply chain resilience. And there's now clearly a stronger tendency for just-in-case supply chain versus the conventional just-in-time, with more countries, more companies being more accepting towards redundancy as we become more resilient. As economies and companies adapt to this new normal in a post-pandemic, endemic world, what are some of the near and long-term implications for Maritime Singapore? How can Maritime Singapore leverage on our strategic advantage of being a knowledge and a talent hub, of being a gateway to the most dynamic economic region of the world? How do we respond? How do we identify opportunities? I hope this is a conversation that all of us can partake in. I'm going to touch a little bit on the role of SMF. I think you have seen quite a fair bit already on the video. But in this strategic context, the mission of SMF to forge partnership and cohesion across the entire maritime ecosystem and to nurture a maritime-ready talent pool for Singapore becomes even more important than ever before. And as FMF, we are reorganizing our work with renewed vigor along the pillars of connectivity, innovation, and of course, talent. Many business leaders I've met told me that one quality that distinguishes Singapore from other maritime hubs is the cohesiveness of the industry here. Yes, there is healthy competition, which is necessary, but players come together across the ecosystem to collaborate on common issues which are too complex to be solved by any one individual player. An example is the recent International Advisory Panel on Maritime Decarbonization, which was co-led by SMF. The report, which was submitted to the Singapore government last year in April, incorporated the views of the industry across the wide spectrum of players on how Singapore can play a leading role in charting a greener, more sustainable maritime industry. SMF will continue to foster this cohesiveness and connectivity, which is a strategic element that makes Singapore a welcoming and conducive place to do and anchor business here. Next, innovation. Whether it's corporate incubators, technology labs, or maritime startups, innovation is happening in Singapore. As SMF, we want to partner the industry to showcase these maritime innovations that are taking place across the ecosystem and bring to life, bring good ideas into fruition. And last, not least, talent. Talent is really the heart of transformation. Whether it's the Maritime One industry scholarships or internships or case competitions to plug tertiary students into maritime or a career portal to connect talent with opportunities, SMF will make talent a centerpiece of our work in the years ahead. This is the piece that will occupy SMF team, Bing T, and myself a lot of our time. And this is important in our minds to future-proof our industry and critical for Maritime Singapore. Finally, allow me to give you a quick brief of this evening's program. Immediately after my opening remarks, I have the pleasure of moderating a stellar panel of industry leaders, whom I'll introduce in due course. And we will probe the topic of opportunities amid disruptions, Maritime Singapore in the post-pandemic world. Following the panel discussion, we have a short dinner break, but comply with COVID-19 safe management measures. I regret that we are only able to offer the bento box dinner tonight. The second half of the evening will be graced by our guest of honor, Singapore's Minister of Transport and Minister in charge of Trade Relations, Mr S Iswaran, who will deliver his address. And then, following Minister's speech, we have the pleasure of inviting Dr. Sharin Othman from DNV and Dr. Eric Jacobson from Menon Economics to present the global launch of the DNV-Menon Leading Maritime Cities of the World 2022 report from Singapore here. So, on behalf of my fellow SMF board members, we thank you very much to join us at this 2022 New Year Conversations, and really looking forward very much to co-create with all of you a strong Maritime Singapore for the benefit of all of us. Thank you very much, and have a great evening ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hall. May I invite you to take your seat on stage for the next item on the program. Our next segment is a panel discussion on opportunities amid disruptions, Maritime Singapore in the post-pandemic world. The discussion will be moderated by SMF Chairman, Mr. Hall. May I now invite the panelists to take their seats on stage. Mr. Jeremy Nixon, CEO of Ocean Network Express. Mr. Lars Kastrup, Co-President and Executive Director of Pacific International Lines. Ms. Kwa Lei Hoon, CE of Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. Mr. Tan Chung Ming, Group CEO of PSA International. Mr. Loh Boon Chai, CEO of Singapore Exchange. Mr. Hall, over to you and the panelists, please. Yep.
All right, good evening again. Let me first welcome my panelists. I'm not going to delve too much into introduction. These are all pretty famous people here. Jeremy Nixon is the CEO of Ocean Network Express. Lei Hoon, Chief Executive of Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. Chong Ming, Group CEO of PSA International. Boon Chai, CEO of Singapore Exchange. And Lars, Co-President and Executive Director of Pacific International Lines. Thank you very much for taking time to join us today and this panelist. The topic today, as I mentioned just now, is opportunities amid disruptions, Maritime Singapore in the post-pandemic world. Maybe I'll just start off by giving a little bit of a context here. As we said earlier, the world is undergoing tremendous changes, many of which has been triggered by COVID. So how does the changing landscape affect maritime, and particularly Maritime Singapore? Now, before I dive into the panel discussion, let me just sort of do a little bit of timekeeping here, because I think we started a little bit late. So we have slightly under an hour for the panel discussion. So if I may, with your help, I need to control time a little bit tightly, right? But so we have 3 segments, and for the first segments, I would welcome contributions from all of you, and I'm going to dive into the first segment, which is around global trade and supply chain. Now, at the onset of COVID, we saw a sharp drop in global trades, followed by a strong recovery, constrained very much by various supply chain bottlenecks. Geopolitics, new COVID variants, uncertainties about energy transitions, supply chain disruptions have all influenced countries' and companies' approach to trades and company strategies. I'd like to start off with Jeremy, if I could. Jeremy, what do you see are the key trends in changing global trades and supply chain that are impacting shipping? And where do you see which trends are more transitory in nature and which ones could be more, perhaps defining, more structural with longer-term impact?
Yeah, thank you very much. And can I just say on behalf of all of us here today, fantastic to be here and see everybody and see a lot of faces and have a real live meeting. So that's super. And of course, there's one single thing that kind of pulls us all together as an industry, is shipping and logistics and port operations. And so many of us in this room have all gone through and experienced really, really tough times in terms of trying to keep the global show on the road in terms of shipping. And of course, the COVID situation has been so dominant in terms of impacting our industry over the last 1.5 years. And, you know, sometimes people perceive this as being a bit of a demand shock. And it's certainly true that trade has generally picked up in certain markets like North America or in Europe more than pre-COVID times, due to changes in consumer behavior or some pump priming by the macroeconomic policies of those particular governments. But I think overall, as we're all aware, this has really been more of a supply shock, where initially we had a shutdown in factories originally back in China, back in March, April last year. But then we saw this catch up again by the shipping industry, and then we saw the problems emerging on land. And we've had this really difficult time with the port operations, particularly in North America and Europe and elsewhere in the world, and the whole sort of landside infrastructure and the supply chain and trucking and the distribution centers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've seen that back up. So I think the first thing is, we all have to acknowledge this is a supply chain shock. And, is it going to get any better? We all certainly hope so. I think from a health standpoint, we've got a real chance, hopefully in 2022, to get over this. But personally, I think the shipping industry is still going to have a very tough time over the next 5 to 6 months. We still have a lot to do with this Omicron variant coming through. We've seen it in Europe. It hasn't peaked yet in Europe. It's in North America. It hasn't peaked yet in North America. And unfortunately, it's coming this way to Asia and to Latin America. And while it may not have a health impact, it will certainly likely to have a significant impact on restricting people's movement, people's ability to work, whether it's in the ports or whether it's on the inland operations. And that, will, of course, will back up further and potentially create more delays and congestion with the ports and therefore on shipping. So I don't think we're out the woods yet on that front, although I'd like to think that the second half of this year we'll start to see some type of recovery. So we need to get over COVID, and hopefully it's a temporary issue, but it's going to be a tough issue for 22. The other thing, I think we talked about resilience of the supply chain, and clearly, we've talked very much in the past about supply chains being too reliant on single suppliers and too reliant on single supply chain setups. And we will need, and I think we're going to see the need to hold more inventory in the future, to have supply chains which aren't reliant just purely on specific geographies or specific partners as well. So, look, in the cognizance of time, I don't want to talk anymore, but I just wanted to kick off and say that short term, we've got to get over COVID first. Medium to longer term, I think it is about holding more inventory and building more resilience into the supply chain. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Maybe I turn to Chong-Bik supply chain, right? Like your views first on supply chain and what it means for PSA in Singapore, and how do you see the global supply chain landscape? What's your vision? What are possible scenarios that might be coming up?
Well, I think a lot of my views overlap with Jeremy, I think possibly Lars as well, and what Lei Hun is seeing. You talk about PSA Singapore, but we also look at supply chain from many other locations in the world, at sea and on land. And as Jeremy said, the first shock was indeed the mismatch of demand and capacity. We think that this will continue for a little bit, partly because capacity is not available due to congestion. Not that the total capacity is inadequate, but it's just not moving fast enough. And that is in part because of the worker situation, Omicron, but also in part because procedures, intermodal movements and so on, through COVID has been found to be not as efficient as they need to be to cope with disruptive challenges. So in the short term, wherever we are in the whole chain, I believe we all have to be agile. It will be a period of continued industrious work. The inventory to sales ratio in US, for instance, is still not very comfortable. We were talking to an equipment manufacturer yesterday, the chairman of a company, and he was saying that in his plant, there are many equipment that would ordinarily have been shipped out, but each have a yellow sticker that says we're short of a semiconductor, we're short of a part. And so it highlights that it's not, the problem in supply chain is not the disruption as a whole, but disruption in enough parts that it stops usual flow from happening. So in time to come, what will such a manufacturer do? I think they'll look for insurance policy, they'll look for people who can provide information, control towers. We look forward to a future where supply chain players work together to use technology and close up on interfaces. In the medium longer term, I think sustainability will be the ultimate problem to solve.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think very, very interesting. I mean, a lot of disruptions has happened, and it looks like it's still going to go on quite a fair bit. Jeremy, I want to tap your mind a little bit on trades. Jeremy used the word catch up, and I think Singapore was acknowledged as a very good catch-up port during COVID, and a strong connectivity in Asia really came to the fore the way that that we have done things. I'd like to ask you, what are new trends that will redefine Singapore's role in global trades? And what are PSA plans for Singapore to continue to do well and continue to thrive?
Well, thank you for the question. I refer to what Kim Pong said in the video just now. He said a very important three-word phrase, node to network. For many decades, I think Singapore has, because of its geographical location and being blessed by being at sort of the crossroads of trade and in between big manufacturer and consumption centers, served many people using Singapore to optimize their trade and their supply chain. But many other players, I would say, with the larger ships and so on, would avail themselves to play such a role. And so I think we have to be much more effective and efficient. The node-to-network concept can only work if we have the ability to work together with our shipping partners and truly make supply chain system flow seamlessly, not just as a node within the boundaries of Singapore port, but as a region and hopefully beyond. We'll need to tap digital information. We need to tap good processes that interface us more effectively. That's one. The other is that the Singapore port, as we move to Tuas, must become different from the one that we started with in Tanjong Pagar and subsequently Pasir Panjang. In Tanjong Pagar and Pasir Panjang, there's no hinterland immediate to itself, surrounded by the city or commercial centers. And it's not easy, or in fact hard to contemplate how we can send AGVs out from port to industrial players so that we are seamlessly connected to the factory step. But with Tuas, there's no such constraint. If we plan right and plan ahead, the port can be seamless with industry, because after all, that is the purpose of the port. It does not exist for itself. And we are kind of thinking through, one of the things I think after COVID we will see is because of the need for resilience, companies are trying to expand their business scope. So recently we see vertical integrations and acquisitions. As PSA, we are also seeking to do the same. Not to be a contest in other supply chains or value chains, but simply that the better we are able to know the challenges in other part of supply chain by owning the problem, the better we are able to be part of the future solution. We're still on the journey.
Thank you, Xiaoming. I want to explore this concept of vertical integration and interconnectivity a little bit later. But thanks for raising it. Maybe I want to just explore a little bit more on this resilience, and I've got asked Lei Hun here. As we all know, many countries are working towards being more self-sufficient, substituting imports with local produce. Companies are also nearshoring. So the question I have for you, Lei Hun, is that how would these changes in your mind affect Singapore's relevance as a maritime hub? And do you see Singapore's competitive edge being at risk?
Thanks, Wing Yu, for inviting us on the panel, and congratulations to being the chairman of SMF. It's a very important role. Really glad to be here. I think on your question, I was just looking at WTO statistics, right? So over the past 70 years, global trade or trade volumes have grown by 40 times. Yes, there is nearshoring, onshoring, diversification, building factories, but we must know that with an increased exponential of trade volumes 40 times, why would countries go back to being protectionist and give up the economies of scale in terms of production and reduce the efficiency in a big wave and just fold and be on your standalone island? So I personally don't see that. In fact, I would say that global trade and globalization has reached a certain stage where I think it's inevitable that we will continue with this trend. The key is actually how do we make the global supply chain, like what Jeremy said, resilient and of course more efficient. And that's what I think we are all trying to do in Singapore as Maritime Singapore. I would say that for the past years, even during crisis and during the pandemic, I hope the industry can see it, how Maritime Singapore has worked as an ecosystem to not only only be a catch-up port, but at the same time push forward with transformation and transition of the industry globally, whether it's in decarbonization and digitalization. So I hope that has entrenched a little bit the value add that we have. Really glad to hear some of the industry players in terms of their views of Singapore, and I do hope that also being in Southeast Asia itself, which is the 5th biggest manufacturing base or factory in the world, we would continue to play a very important role on the global supply chain and help to resolve the challenges together.
Great to hear. And that leads me to my next question, which a lot of our audience is very interested to hear. So what would be the Singapore's government's top priorities for maritime industry, perhaps for the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think when I first came on board, that's about 3 years ago, we talked about 3 Ds, right? Digitalization, disruption, and decarbonization. Now, I just want to speak a little bit on the topic of this global supply chain resilience. I would say is, again, 3 Ds, and I think most of us are already working on it. It's really on data standardization, data exchange or data sharing, and last but not least, data security. So I think if you want to make the global supply chain efficient, it has to be digital. We have to digitalize our supply chain transformation. To do that, there are already various platforms working on it. So for example, at the data standardization phase, there's Digital Port at SG, which we are trying to standardize the type of information for port clearance. There's Digital Ocean, which we are trying to move at the global level, working with IMO on data harmonization on the standards. On the data sharing part, we have seen how PSA has offered a cargo solutions, as you've seen in the video, to do door-to-door track and trace of the cargo. So, and at the data sharing level, we've also seen SG Tradex that's being formed to look at how businesses can actually exchange information in a more trustworthy manner. There's also data security, which we have to look at. So there's a PACnet, which Singapore MPA will form with other port authorities. We share information so that should a port or a company has been hacked into and there's an incident, it's shared among the port authorities, and we would buy time to try to be ahead of the hackers. So these are just some of the 3DS area: data standardization, data sharing, and data harmonization, and data security we will need to work on, focusing on global supply chain resilience moving forward. Now, so my appeal to the industry is this: there will be trade-offs. There will be polarity discussion we need to get into. Should it be an inclusive model or an exclusive model? Should it be collaborate? Should it be a competition? Right? Should it be vertical or should it be horizontal? I think these are decisions, if we make it with our minds, it's very clear what the answers are, because it's a global challenge requiring global solution. But some of times we don't really make decisions using our mind. So I think as an industry over here in Maritime Singapore, I do hope we'll think about this and get past polarity and be able to spiral it to be a global sort of collaboration moving forward.
Thank you very much, Leon. That's very good. Last, maybe I just tap a little bit into your vast experience in shipping and particularly in the liner trades. 2 questions for you last, if I could. What do you see are key trends affecting liner trades, particularly in this part of the world, China, Southeast Asia, and the Middle East? And perhaps a more strategic question that I'd like to really seek your views is around cargo shifts. Cargo shifts via sea transport, vis-a-vis rail and land haulage. And with China's Belt and Road Initiative taking into next gear very quickly, what could be implications of the regional liner trades of Southeast Asia, and what could be, how that may impact the regional line strategies?
Thank you, Wing Yu, and good to be here with all of you. And it's a long time we haven't been able to get together like that, so that's great. As a carrier whose trade area is all the regions actually except North America and Europe, where Jeremy mentioned how the whole COVID impact started and the challenges we have with the ports there and so on and so forth. We are basically seeing the same issues and the same challenges in all the regions of the world, and of course also in Southeast Asia. Initially happened because of the impact from the 2 big markets of North America and Europe. And eventually, all these regions individually had their own challenges, their own dynamics for creating these challenges and ports and so on and so forth. Of course, also the seafarers issues and so on. Now, We believe that it will continue. We believe these regions will still have and face their challenges. But as Jeremy mentioned, that we expect to see the situation ease in the two bigger markets, we will also see some easing in the other markets, say whatever structural issues they may have and continue to have. So we will see the changes as move forward. The question about the land transportation and rail and truck. Actually, we're talking about whether would we see any transfer of maritime business into rail and truck. If you just switch over to Europe, in Europe what people are talking about is how can we get it off the road and onto the ships? So it's actually less polluting. So there's a tendency in Europe and other areas where we actually want to get it on the ship and off the road. I don't think that the capacity which is being offered in terms of Trans-Siberian or regional railroads and so on is really marginal. It's enough. It's a marginal capacity. It's more expensive. So it'll take a share. It'll continue to develop by its own merits, by its own efficiencies. But I don't see this impacting the maritime volumes at all. When you look at a little bit forward, as you mentioned, I first look backwards. I look backwards to 2018, 2019, when we had the trade war in between China and North America, and it started. And we saw, custom duties and so on. Despite that, China continued to develop. China continued in a very resilient way to grow its export. Also, at that time, we saw some switch from China to sourcing from Southeast Asia. This has continued, but at the same time, China has continued to develop it with its own pace also. What we see now is that it'll continue, but it also develops business and transport and trade between China and Southeast Asia, because there's some subcontracting and some changes there. So actually, the fact that we see Southeast Asia developing also brings more intra-Asia business and develop into the region. And we can see today the volume are increasing and there's more and more demand. What we also see is that the One Belt, One Road is definitely going to have an impact. It has already now. Also because of the development ports and infrastructures which China is developing in the region. Not only Southeast Asia, but also Middle East and East Africa, which is all connected to what we are doing here in Singapore. And I really believe that this is an opportunity for the regional Southeast carriers to capture more business and develop more business. It'll be in competition with the global carriers because, everybody is tapping into this market. But eventually, by these regional carriers and working together with a PSA, with all the competencies and capacities the PSA have and all the technology which is being developed and the capacity coming on board, I'm sure that the regional carriers partnering with PSA will be a great opportunity, have a great opportunities for the future in the region.
Thank you very much. Great opinions. Yeah. Let me turn to Boon Chye. Let me turn to Boon Chye on the perspective of capital market development and shipping. Certainly at COVID-19, we have seen a surge in earnings of shipping companies, great times, especially for liner companies, and there appears to be renewed interest in shipping stocks. So the question for you is this an opportunity for SGX to target shipping companies to list in Singapore? And what other investment opportunities that you may see in the shipping sector?
Thank you. And first of all, Happy New Year, everyone. And I wish Maritime Singapore and every one of you have many more years of success. Thank you for the question. So indeed, we did see not just a recovery in international trade, obviously the easing of the pandemic restrictions, stimulus globally. So for the sector as a whole, the maritime sector that includes shipping, shipbuilding, offshore services, we saw actually some of our SGX listed companies, their value or market capitalization almost doubled last year. And if you look at the trading liquidity of some of these companies as measured by their turnover velocity, it's also gone up from somewhere between 60 to 100%. So indeed, a very vibrant sector, well deserved. And as a maritime hub, coupled with the capital markets and also the host of the ecosystem, we actually see indeed interest and capital clearly is abundant. So it's probably an interesting time for companies in this sector who are looking for all forms of capital. In terms of investment or opportunities, I think there are many. For those of you that are in freight, not only obviously there are freight derivatives. If you look back in 2018, 2019, if you have managed your freight exposure well, but you have not managed your currency exposure, in particular RMB, you have either made more money or you have lost completely your freight exposure. Likewise, for those of you that are in the dry bulk business, in particular iron ore, China continues to be a big importer of that, and that's clearly an area. But I think importantly linked to that is obviously sustainability. There's now a whole host of ESG-related commodities that I think is interesting. Last but not least, through our subsidiary Baltic Exchange, we have also developed a carbon emission capture just to help shippers looking at some of the popular routes to try and measure that, and also energy efficiency operating indicator. So hopefully some of these reference values could be used as a tool for many of you to try and differentiate yourself in your business.
Thank you very much, Boon Chye. I'm going to explore this theme of sustainability and decarb very shortly. But if I may, I'll just circle back to Jeremy. A shipping question. Shipping companies appear to be clearly shifting strategies from pure shipping approach to a supply chain approach. I mean, Chong Ming mentioned about integration, vertical integration. And there appears to be a renewed interest by liner companies to integrate supply chains with adjacent logistics service. So may I start off with Jeremy? Can I have your view on that, and what are the drivers that are driving this trend? And next to Lars.
Yeah, thank you. I think obviously Lars has a lot of experience on the liner and logistics side from his career with Maersk and CMA and APL, and of course PIL also has some logistics capability. Myself personally, maybe not so much, but you know, P&O and had logistics as well as a liner business. NYK had both, and I would say that generally those companies have been run, in separately. Yeah, we've seen some changes recently. We've seen obviously some very large carriers, the top 3 now in the liner industry, which make up some 45% of global market share on the liner side, start to invest even more on the land side, but also into the 3PL and even into integrator strategies. And you know, I think we'll all be watching very, very closely on that. And obviously that's driven by getting closer to the customer, trying to offer a pure end-to-end solution. It may be driven also by the fact that their balance sheets are quite good at the moment, and therefore they have some quite good funds to explore into new sectors. But as O&E, I still think it's quite an early stage in our development. We're quite humble. We're just a point-to-point container operator. And until we do that very, very well and have fully invested in our fleet and our digital solutions and our terminal requirements, I think we'll be keeping out of that sector and leaving it to the big boys to get on with, and also to many of our clients who are also 3PL and forwarders.
Lars.
Thank you. To Jeremy's reference, yeah, I mean, the big carriers today, and they have been there for many years, are of course developing this. And then I remember I had an experience when I was heading France from Maersk 15, 18 years ago, and out of 700 people, 200 worked in maritime shipping, 500 work in logistics. So I mean, it's not new. And one of them is sitting here. Actually, we worked together with Thomas at that time, and he chose the other way, so he went to logistics. Now, it started back in the 80s when the shipping lines gave up the CFS cargo, actually, and then started doing consolidation, supply chain management, and develop an alternative business. And it's a natural thing simply because you have your cargo, your your customer base, and you just add services to your customers, and you see what they need, and you build it. And the shipping lines build very strong IT solutions for supply chain management, and that has now developed into developing through organic growth a lot of logistics capabilities within the major carriers. Now the change now is that we see big acquisitions coming in and adding to it, so it's no longer organic; it's really acquisition. Mainly made by liner profit, but eventually will develop its own profit also. It adds to customer stickiness. It helps to keep your customers, definitely, and it adds also a second or a third leg to the very volatile liner business, where many carriers are now added terminals and ports, and now also the logistics. So it's a stabilizing factor also, and it's a cargo generator for the carriers. I don't think one size fits all, and we also see there are different strategies. Which is the right one, we'll see. It's going to be very exciting. There's also maybe opportunities because some carriers also decide not to go that way. So maybe that another opportunity for these carriers then to develop more business with those who are exclusive logistics companies and so on. So it's exciting times.
Certainly it is. Thank you very much. Let me shift gears and move on to the next segment of our conversations with our panelists, which is really around sustainability and innovation. Decarb, we talk a lot about it. Certainly going to be a top agenda for 2022, with increasing demand for transparency and disclosure from various stakeholders. Regulatory clarity, cost-effective technologies, availability of financing, these are all very critical enablers for the industry to take tangible actions towards decarb. Perhaps I'd like to start with Chong Bing here, if I could. Sustainable supply chain, I think that's a very big part of PSA. So I'd like to seek your view how PSA sees its role in managing end-to-end carbon emissions, and what would you need from your supply chain partners to achieve carbon reduction?
That's a very difficult question when you actually, but thank you for that. Because think about it, right? The port part of the end-to-end is really quite a defined, distinctive, and quite measured part of it. So the first part of PSA's role must be to deal with that responsibly, as effectively as we can. So that all companies, I believe, we are looking ahead and say, on the basis of SBTi, science-based initiative, how should we mark ourselves as we progress? What are the options? Electrification, Scope 2 energy management, and so on. And at the same time, of course, we should not stop there. Now, even this piece on the Scope 1 reduction is already quite challenging, but Scope 2 and 3 will require more partnerships and collaboration. And so embarking on that will require us to know what's outside of our perimeter, and it gets back to the end-to-end. That's why it's hard. And when we went out and try and seek to understand, firstly, we don't own those scopes. We need to then have partners who are willing to share and co-own outcomes in, say, electric energy management, in the energy transition, not just electricity, but future fuels. Those requires quite a lot of collaboration and co-creation. And SMF actually led quite a very good piece of work on that. But we see for PSA in the future, the opportunity is in understanding the energy footprint of production systems and how logistics play a role, or supply chain plays a role, in whether that CO2 footprint is high or is mitigated. There are 5 or 6 production systems that account for 50% of global cargo CO2 emissions: food, construction, fashion, FMCG, and manufacturing, like automobiles. Now, each of these have many different types of challenges. Some are production related, and food, you have production, harvest, and so on. But many are actually either enabled or compromised by weak supply chain, enabled by good supply chain or compromised otherwise. Do we know that? In the past, we found that supply chain in its fragmentation achieve more efficient delivery of the services within each piece of the vertical of supply chain. But I think it is demonstrated in COVID that there are problems when you cross interfaces. Now you ask about integration. I don't think the whole world will be fully integrated, but integration will be part of the answer for some complex parts of supply chain where indeed a whole answer is better than a stitched up solution based on various pieces working together. So I think for PSA, we are trying to work on that thesis of first changing ourselves, involving ourselves in other activities, either by partnership or by acquisition, using digital enablement as the game changer so that they operate differently from the way they were done before. 20, 30 years ago, this is not possible. Today is highly possible. And then working with partners to see whether we can orchestrate new solutions.
Thank you very much, Chaming. That's very interesting. Let me turn to Boon Chye. And very, very happy to note that the Baltic Exchange has introduced carbon assessments and is expanding its role to support market mechanisms to reduce CO2 emissions from the shipping sector. And at the same time, SGX also launched CIX together with DBS Bank, with Temasek and StanChart. So the question I'd like to tap with you, Boon Chye, is how does SGX support the maritime sector in achieving the CARB goals, big goals? And can you share with us your perspective of how CIX supports the maritime industry and how could maritime companies be part of the whole CIX ecosystem?
Thank you. We're doing quite a number of things for our listed companies, and that would obviously include the maritime sector, whether you're a listed company or not. I think there are three main areas. One is really disclosure, and that's what investors are really looking for, not just in terms of data, but how do you standardize data, and that's not easy. So in that regard, what we've done is we are in the midst of developing and probably launch in the next couple of months a data portal that will share with companies. There are about 27 metrics that investors have told us that these are the metrics that what they care about. And we'll help companies to say, look, based on these metrics, depending on your business, this is maybe how you want to disclose your information, and we will amplify that to as many recipients as possible. And then secondly, obviously, is capacity building. So we're organizing training. We've also published a guide on decarbonization for companies to use. And then third is obviously around sustainability or ESG tools and solutions. So I talk about ESG derivatives in particular, some of the greener commodities. With regard to CIX, so for a company on that journey, obviously you need to measure your footprint, you need to set a target, you need to go about reducing, and then it's a feedback loop. But at the end of it, they will be very hard to abate emissions. First, you really got to reduce and get about measuring that, but there'll be a residual part that's hard to remove completely, and that's where Carbon Impact X comes in. It will provide very high quality carbon credits for offset. Offset is not the complete or only solution, but I think it can be a complementary toolkit, and that's what we're doing with the launch of CIX.
Thank you. Let me turn to Lei Hun next from the lens of Maritime Singapore. How would a strong carbon exchange marketplace unlock new growth for Maritime Singapore in your mind?
I guess like what you said in the beginning, right? When it comes to decarbonization, you need green financing. In fact, if you look through the frame on decarbonization, there is three pillars: the ships, infrastructure, and standard. So on the standard part, I think this is something which we have to work on, whether it's bunkering standards, etc. With the global standard of the maritime decarbonization with IMO, we need to set standards on bunkering, for example, for future fuel and move forward. Now, on the part of ships and infrastructure, I'm not just talking about port infrastructure, we're also talking about energy infrastructure, because what is the type of terminals that you need? What is the type of tanks that you need? What's the type of production process you need to turn hydrogen to ammonia? What's the transportation of it? And I think all this, you will require financing. There are, of course, different models of how things can be financed. First, I think at the global level, there is a conversation on bunkering, or sort of a carbon levy, where you levy bunkers, and therefore you can pull together a sum of money that will allow, the fund will allow research along the way. And this is one of the industry proposals. That guy is here, so it's from ICS and Aspen. The other option or the other solution that can complement will be having a carbon market, right? With a carbon market, it allows companies to at least start thinking about how to account your carbon. And when you account it, you can think about offsetting it in scope 3. And when you do that, it allows you extra or additional resources to think about whether you want to invest when your ship is being retired. Do you want to convert it, retrofit it, or do you want to now buy a new build with a new fuel? And it's not cheap, right? If you want to go into ammonia fuel, methanol fuel, or whether it is hydrogen fuel, which actually I have not got any takers from industry players to build a hydrogen fuel industry. So I'm looking at hands, to be raised at this session if there is any. We need to start building so that at least we can accelerate the adoption of the technology. So if you ask me, CIX, market-based mechanisms, these are ways which I think will help accelerate the adoption, accelerate the solutions to be found, the technological solution found, and accelerate the adoption, not just for the bigger boys, but also for your smaller companies who have smaller fleet of ships, who are looking at support, financial support, to also start getting to the act of decarbonization.
Thank you, Lynn. I'll get back to the business side and I'll pose these questions to Jeremy. A very common discussions that we had in the last year or so is, are shippers really prepared to pay for green logistics solutions? And is a low carbon shipping option a competitive advantage in your mind? And should companies start investing in creating low carbon offerings now, or should you perhaps focus on other green issues, which are many, of course?
Yeah, very, very big scope of question and covering many parts. But in summary, I do believe that customers are ready to pay. Secondly, I think in terms of investing right now, it's far more expensive on the CapEx side. The fuel availability is not there yet, but the fuels are going to cost a lot more money. So we do need to get on with the investment program. The IMO needs to get on in 2022 in terms of helping to further build the framework and to provide market-based measures which will encourage more of us to invest in the more expensive types of ships and invest in the more expensive types of fuels. I think we'll have a number of customers who will be early adopters and prepared to pay for it. And then over time, the market-based measures will actually force all of us, including those customers that don't want to pay for it, to get on board and drive it forward. So I'm quite optimistic, but we have to do a lot of work in 2022 through the IMO channel and get this market-based measures going and really progress the technology and the fuel types so that in 4 or 5 years from now, we can really move this to more critical mass. Thank you.
Maybe I end this segment with innovation. I started with you, Chong Ming, and perhaps I could ask you, on this part. The Emerging Stronger Task Force, which you co-chaired, has highlighted the importance of raising innovation capabilities in company. But I think there are a lot of companies having issues and challenges and struggles. So could you share with us what would PSA's key decision factors for investing into innovation, and perhaps share a little bit of your experience, how to go about convincing shareholders and employees?
So the first thing, I don't think there is a secret sauce or any silver bullet. I think all companies equally have the same opportunity as well as challenges in convincing their organization, employees, shareholders, all that. Innovation is key and important. It's one thing to accept it here, another thing to make it happen. But the things that can make innovation more vibrant within a company are to allow people to do two things. One is to embrace a larger scope than the business itself. If you're only innovating within your own space, it tends to be incremental. Yes, maybe once in a while you have a game changer, but in our industry anyway, our scope tends to be within the space that we are involved in. And if that's the only space that you allow your people to innovate, is actually quite restrictive. The second thing is, I suppose, the focus on willingness to innovate against the risk of failure, and the shift of IRR to value. Jeremy highlighted a dilemma, expensive capex and costly fuel, so that's a real downer. But if you think about the value that it can create, and I do believe that more and more customers will come on board and be willing to pay. In fact, I see that as being one of the key shifts that will take place within the next few years if we're all serious about this. Then it is not about the current return, but potentially the value in the future. So I'd say for us, we open up the space quite a bit. We have a venture arm that invests in things that are not directly related to our current business activity. And so by demonstrating that, modeling that, and allowing our folks to have the ability to innovate and to have the dialogue around innovation. So we have a digital platform internally covering our entire 40,000 workers that allow people to talk in different languages about common innovation areas. So to talk around it, to accept that not all things will come out well, IRR may not be there, value is important, try and create that positive vibe around innovation.
Thank you very much. Communication, getting everybody on board, that's critical. Let's move on to exactly this part, getting people on board, and I want to explore the third segment of today's conversation, which is talent, and I'm sure it's a subject very close to everybody's hearts and minds. And attracting, retaining, developing talents, we all know is so vital for growth, for transformation of business for the maritime industry. And I must say that the SMF has really done pretty good work here. We have the Maritime One scholarships bringing young talents, young minds to the industry. We have the Maritime Singapore Connect profiling the industry, connecting students, job seekers to opportunities. So certainly talents, as we said, is going to be a big piece of our focus area going forward. So let me circle back into maritime, from a perspective of talent attraction and retention, to do a lot of the things we want to do: digitalization, supply chain integration, decarbonization. So perhaps I would like to kickstart this segment with someone who's not directly in maritime, Boon Chye, yourself. And I'd like to tap a little bit of your perspective, and given your experience in the financial sector, and Singapore has the aspirations to be the maritime capital to serve the needs of the industry. Do you think that talent is a constraint here?
Well, I don't think so. No doubt we're a small city-state. Clearly, talent has to come from developing talent. So I think training development, clearly, I'm sure every one of us does that. And then secondly, we clearly have to be open to talent from outside of Singapore. And third, which I normally share with other board directors, board chairmen, or nominating committee, because I'm the co-chair, had the privilege of co-chair being for the Council for Board Diversity that promotes and champions diversity on board, in particular gender, to have more women on board. And my message to some of these directors is, stop looking within your own personal network. Stop looking within your usual circle. You got to widen that search. And maybe for any industry, not necessarily maritime, maybe we should also look at talent from outside of our own industry.
Right. So looking for a broader base and expanding our vision. Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about seafarers and sea, and it's a little bit around future of work. I'd like to address this question to Jeremy. Future of work of talents at sea and on board the ships, and as lines between shore-based and shipboard operations converging with IoT, with remote operations capabilities, with predictive analytics. Very important, we all know accurate transmission of information and data between ship and shore is very important. And that speaks to the digital literacy of our seafarers, which is going to be, in my mind, a very important factor. So Jeremy, as head honcho of one of the largest shipping companies, how do you see competencies and talents required on board our ships evolving? And is there an opportunity for Singapore perhaps to develop the training and education services to meet maritime's needs for shipboard talents in the future?
Yeah, I think we should all recognize the fantastic job that seafarers continue to do in our industry. And, you know, we have those 60,000 ships out there, and it's only the crew that are driving them. And they've done such a brilliant job over the last 2 years. And frankly, we're not out of the woods yet, as we've probably indicated. I personally am a little bit conservative on this. I don't really follow the school of thought that we're going to go to heavy automation on ships and remote control and moving a lot of the seafaring capabilities off the vessels and back on shore. I think the vessels are going to get more sophisticated, more technical. I think that the operating big ships, technical ships over long distances with increasingly more difficult weather systems and patterns, plus navigating all these international different time zones and requirements and the regulations, it's actually getting more and more complex. So I think that we are going to need more seafarers in the future and more technically capable and better trained. And that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that we as an industry are going to face going forward. I would also say, just on behalf of the seafarer, that you know, I think that Singapore has done such a great job in so many areas. But on the seafaring side, I think there's still room for some improvement in terms of how we can improve the welfare and try to improve on the crew change situation here. Good progress recently, but let's keep pushing on. And Singapore, I'd like to really see as being the #1 center for crew welfare, crew change, and crew training long term. And I think that's something we could all work together to try and help happen.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I think a lot of us here are very much with you on the thought. I've just been informed that we're running a little bit short of time, so unfortunately, you know, we're not able to tap a lot of things. I would really want to seek perspective of my distinguished panelists here on talents, and perhaps we can continue these conversations again. You know, absolutely important conversation. So maybe I would just perhaps move ahead a little bit quicker and really ask everybody in terms of, you know, if you can list your top priorities and concerns, whether it's around people, talent, innovation, sustainability, or whatever. Like, if you can list your top 3 priorities and concerns for 2022, that would be great. And perhaps I'd like to start off with Lei Hun.
Top 3 priorities: digitalization, decarbonization, and talent. And I just wanted to add that for the talent piece, I just had like a 2-3 hour intensive session with my team in MPA, and I think there's indeed a lot more that I think Singapore can contribute in terms of perhaps making ourselves into a talent hub on seafaring or perhaps on onshore work as well. So excited, and I think we'll probably share more or co-create this solution with SMF and with the industry more in the next coming months. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Lei Hun. Last.
Thank you. So yes, pretty much the same. Number 1, look out for our seafarers and make sure we take good care of them, because they've really been through a tough time. And it's not going to be easy over the next 6 months with the variant circulating. Number 2, continue to grow our talent in the company, and we have a lot of good talent to develop and grow. And number 3, decarbonization, which is high on the agenda, of course.
Thank you. Chong Ming?
I would echo digitalization, but more from the perspective of how we use digitalization for, first, resilience. Second, sustainability is key. And third, yes, is talent. But I would add one more, and that is, I think as leaders, we have to model partnerships. Now we're going to kind of think in our minds how we individually can engage in the right partnerships proactively, with outcome-based activities, and ultimately, hopefully, at the end, and my best wishes for 2022, but at the end of this year, we can look back and say, we as leaders have done our part.
Great, thank you. Boon Chye, if I could.
Yeah, I share the digitalization and the sustainability point. In particular, pandemic has brought that one out. I will add, at least for the financial market, resilience and trust. I mean, the financial sector went into the pandemic from a position of strength. As an exchange, we operated almost 100% from home, operating an exchange for a period of time. So resilience and trust is where we look forward.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Yeah, I think number 1 is decarbonization. I think industry's ahead of the regulators and government, but I give a tremendous amount of credit to the Singapore government in terms of the progress and support it's giving the industry to try and push the environmental agenda along. And I think this global decarbonization center that's been set up here in Singapore could make Singapore not just a regional leader in decarb, but actually a global leader. So that's fantastic. We need to push on with that. I think number 2 is TUAS coming on board, I think is fantastic. It's very, very brave of Singapore to have pushed on with the investment during 2019, 2020, 2021. It's perfect timing now. It's a great opportunity to capture more market share in the region in terms of container throughput, but also develop some of those regional and resilience on supply chain. And number 3 is, yes, the dear old seafarer. Let's not forget the seafarer. Singapore gets number 1 in so many areas, and we'll talk about them with the awards tonight. But let's get the seafarer back up to number 1 with Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great thoughts. Well, we can actually go on and on, perhaps another couple of hours, but we can't quite do that. So let's continue our conversations off the stage. Thank you very much. My panelists can give them all a very big hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hall and the panel for that enriching discussion. We have now reached the midpoint of the program, and it is time for dinner, which will be served in bento boxes in compliance to the safe management measures. Please refrain from intermingling between tables. Thank you and enjoy your meal. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have enjoyed your meal. We will now continue with our next segment. Our guest of honor, Mr. S Iswaran, Minister for Transport and Minister in charge of Trade Relations, will now address us. May I now invite Minister Iswaran on stage. Minister, please.
Mr. Ho Wing Yu, Chairman of SMF, members of the industry, friends, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all of you. First, let me say that I'm very happy to join you this evening at the SMF New Year Conversations, which is also the first maritime industry event of 2022. It is very nice to be able to see many familiar faces, and that too in person, which is a rare privilege in these days. Maritime Singapore has done well in the past year to preserve our position as a trusted global maritime hub. In contrast to the global supply chain disruptions, the Port of Singapore has continued to serve as a one-stop catch-up port. With support from our tripartite partners, PSA reopened berths at Keppel Terminal, activated container yards at the new Tuas Port, and deployed more manpower to help liners cope with schedule disruptions. MPA supported crew changes and expanded vaccination access to include foreign seafarers on board ocean-going vessels, calling at Singapore and signing on to ships in Singapore. Our efforts have been recognized, and they have also paid off. In 2021, Singapore's container throughput rose to a new record high of 37.5 million TEUs. Bunker sales of both conventional fuels and liquefied natural gas exceeded 50 million tons. The Port of Singapore was crowned the best global seaport for the first time, and also as the best Asian seaport for the 33rd time at the 2021 Asia Freight, Logistics and Supply Chain Awards. In tandem, our International Maritime Centre continued to grow, with 9 companies establishing operations in Singapore and 14 businesses expanding their operations here. Singapore retained its top spot as an international shipping center in the Xinhua Baltic International Shipping Center Development Index for the 8th consecutive year. And like all of you, I am looking forward to the results of the Menon report on the leading maritime cities of the world. So, we have in general done well last year, and while the near-term focus is on the transition to living with COVID-19, we must also be keenly attuned to the driving forces that are shaping the strategic context of the maritime sector, something that I'm sure all of you are seized with. First, demographics and economic fundamentals will drive trade and the demand for goods. With the rise of Asia, including and especially China, India, and ASEAN, more resources and goods will flow into Asia to meet the growing middle-class demand. Second, geopolitical competition, along with supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic, have compelled governments and companies to re-examine the resilience of supply chain strategies. A blend of just-in-time and just-in-case supply chain models will likely emerge in the coming years, with implications for sailing distances and vessel sizes, as well as increasing demand for more flexible shipping services. Third, novel technologies like artificial intelligence, big data analytics, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, will transform the maritime sector and indeed many others. Automation and robotics will also drive changes in production and supply chains. And finally, climate change, which is the defining challenge of our times. Retreating Arctic ice could open new commercial routes between Asia and Europe and divert trade flows away from this region. And meanwhile, there is a mounting call for urgent global action to tackle international shipping's carbon emissions. And as with all changes and challenges, these driving forces can also yield opportunities. And I believe that the next bound of growth for our maritime sector, and also the sustaining of Singapore's status as a global hub port and international maritime center, hinges critically on 4 factors: our resilience, digitalization, decarbonization, and talent. I'm sure much of this has already been discussed amongst you in the course of this event today, but let me share some of our thoughts on how these thrusts will inform the government's efforts and work in the maritime sector in the years ahead. First, on resilience. Countries and companies are taking various measures to strengthen supply chains, be it reshoring, nearshoring, or friendshoring production, or multi-sourcing and stockpiling supplies. The challenge is to achieve supply chain resilience without impairing efficiency or competitiveness. Maritime companies that can offer bespoke or customized cargo solutions to customers at scale with competitive pricing will be best positioned to capture this opportunity. As a key transshipment hub port, we believe we can continue to play an outsized role in securing global supply chains. Just as our current competitive strengths derive from thoughtful investments made over the years, we will continue to invest in automation and digitalization to provide best-in-class terminal handling and marine services to serve our port's customers. And this brings me to digitalization. The ability to capture, process, store, and analyze data efficiently and securely will undoubtedly unlock significant productivity gains and new business opportunities. For instance, Kolovnes established a new business unit, market manager, to develop vessel operating solutions as part of its digital freight and tonnage platform. Equipped with machine learning and data-driven decision-making tools, the platform helps its clients to manage their market portfolio and risk exposures. This year, we will progressively roll out new port systems and programs to drive maritime digitalization. As a start, I'm pleased to announce that MPA has awarded $3 million to 8 industry projects to develop digital bunkering solutions. These projects will leverage data from the mass flow meter systems, new IoT devices, and MPA's Maritime Data Hub to reduce the time taken to complete bunkering documentation, such as the bunker delivery note. At the ecosystem level, this is estimated to save the industry over 39,000 man days annually, and it will help reinforce our reputation as a trusted and efficient bunkering hub. Thirdly, maritime decarbonization is a key component of the global response to climate change. To that end, we could, for example, harness automatic identification systems and data on weather and engine performance to dynamically optimize voyages and reduce fuel consumption. Several commodity traders and shipbrokers in Singapore are also looking to expand into carbon trading and brokerage. To maintain this momentum, the government had taken advice from the International Advisory Panel on Maritime Decarbonization by setting up the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization to spearhead the maritime sector's energy transition journey. In the coming months, MPA will be launching the Maritime Singapore Decarbonization Blueprint 2050, which will outline our plans to mitigate domestic maritime emissions and support global efforts to reduce emissions from international shipping. This includes initiating joint industry R&D projects in areas such as alternative fuels and energy management, and promoting green financing. Ultimately, our vision and aspirations for the Maritime Centre are underpinned by talent, capable women and men who can and do fill the ranks of Maritime Singapore. Amidst the so-called Great Resignation in many countries, the maritime sector will need an attractive package of wages, benefits, perhaps most importantly, career progression, to attract and groom talent with in-demand skills such as operations management, data analytics, and sustainability. To prepare our maritime workforce for these opportunities, we have been working with our tripartite partners to map out business and training needs and provide co-funding for skills development. We've also enhanced our sea transport career conversion program to equip mid-career switchers and existing maritime employees to take on new or expanded roles, with competencies in areas such as automation, data analytics, cybersecurity, and decarbonization. We must attract the best talent, local and foreign, to support the maritime sector's digital and green transformation. The difficulties faced by seafarers over the past 2 years is a stark reminder of the importance of these unsung heroes. We will be re-examining the talent attraction and career development landscape for seafaring, together with our industry and union partners, to ensure that it remains a viable career option for those with a spirit of adventure and a love for the sea. All these ideas and initiatives need to be synthesized into a holistic plan. And that's where our sea transport industry transformation map comes in. The first ITM was launched, I understand, at this very event just 4 years ago. And it is timely that we do a refresh. The Ministry of Transport and the Maritime Port Authority have conducted an internal review and are consulting the industry and unions for inputs. We look forward to partnering all of you in charting the next phase of our maritime sector. Maritime Singapore has stayed resilient in the face of challenges wrought by the pandemic over the past 2 years. And I am confident that our vision, strategies, and strong tripartite partnership will not only see us through this recovery phase, but also enable us to emerge even stronger as a globally competitive maritime center. I wish all of you a very pleasant evening and a very happy and prosperous new year ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. First published in 2012, the DNV-Menon Leading Maritime Cities report is co-developed by DNV and Menon Economics. To launch the 2022 Leading Maritime Cities report and unveil the much-anticipated rankings, I have the pleasure of inviting on stage Dr. Shahrin Osman, Director of Maritime Decarbonisation and Autonomy Centre of Excellence, Asia Pacific at DNV. Dr. Eric Jacobsen, who is the partner and chairman at Menon Economics, will be joining us virtually from Oslo. We begin first with Dr. Eric Jacobsen's video presentation, followed by Dr. Shahrin Osman, who will address us in person.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Eric Jacobsen. I'm partner and chair in Menon Economics, an Oslo-based economic research and analysis firm. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Singapore Maritime Foundation for the ability to launch the 22 edition of the Leading Maritime Cities of the World report here at this event. Thank you. I will hold a brief introduction to the report, and then my colleague Shahrin Osman, who has been the editor of the report together with me. The report is made as a collaboration between Menon Economics and DNV. Shahrin will give you the rankings and some selected results from the report. In this year's report, we have benchmarked 15,000 cities around the world on 40 different indicators that all together constitute the ranking of and the definition of the leading maritime city of the world. First, why do we make this report, and why do we focus on cities and not on nations? The reason is quite simple. It is that cities, and when we're talking about cities, is not the city center, it's the city region that are defined as everything, all companies, all activities that are less than 2 hours drive from the city center. These city regions are engines of innovation and growth. They constitute and account for 80% of world GDP. The cities are engines of growth in all countries. Cities are more productive. Cities are also melting points for ideas and knowledge. And finally, companies tend to cluster in the surroundings of the cities, that is in the city regions. So the maritime industry in general and shipping in particular is a global industry where the companies are footloose. They operate around the world and have an ability to locate headquarters, R&D, operations, and other types of activities in all types of cities around the world. Hence, cities compete to attract the most competitive, the most innovative maritime companies. They are focusing on attracting the winners. But what do we mean by a leading maritime city? What constitutes a leading maritime city? In this report, we focus on 4 elements, 4 factors that together give a kind of a complete cluster, a complete leading maritime city. First, a large and sophisticated shipping community with owners, headquarters and operations, a large port with varied and advanced logistics services, a specialized technological milieu composed of shipyards, equipment producers, maritime R&D, innovative startups, and finally, a complete supply of specialized world-class services of finance, law and insurance. These 4 factors are altogether what constitute a leading maritime city. But what are the drivers behind? What are the kind of antecedents and mechanisms that shape a leading maritime city? Through our research, since we made the book Attracting the Winners 20 years ago, and through the research behind these reports, we have identified the following factors as the most important drivers. A strategic location, like for example you find here in Singapore, a favorable and stable political framework, and a transparent and efficient legal framework, factors that are very important for companies choosing a location for their business. Proximity to large demanding customers is important for all types of suppliers. Local rivalry to win the contracts, to win the deals with the customers is important. Of course, a large pool of talented people is extremely important. Also, the flow of information, knowledge, and ideas between the players in the community is very important, which imply also that the relationships have to be based on trust between the players. And finally, the soft location factors, the factors that determine whether a city is an attractive place to live for the people that are based in the industry. So in the report, we have 5 pillars. They are equally weighted. First, we have shipping, the shipping community, ship owners, managers, different types, all types of shipping segments, of course. The second pillar is finance and law, the banks, insurance companies, lawyers, financial advisors, new types of financial instruments like leasing, etc., and also the stock exchange, and the maritime companies and the stock exchanges. The third pillar is the maritime technology, that is the shipyards, the equipment producers, but also the R&D, the classification companies, digital startups, tech startups, clean tech startups, etc. And the fourth pillar is the port and logistics, the port in themselves and all types of logistics services surrounding the port. And in addition, the fifth pillar is the attractiveness and competitiveness of the city in itself. So we have altogether 40 indicators, 29 objective indicators from publicly available, reliable sources, where we have altogether 15,000 cities that are benchmarked around these 29 objective indicators. And we also have a panel of approximately 300 global maritime experts that assess the maritime cities on all the 5 pillars that I presented. So in the report, you will find a full overview, a description of the indicators, and of course also the full scores on each of the top 50 cities on all of the indicators. And by that, I'll leave it to my colleague Shireen Osman from DNV to give you the rankings and some selected results from this year's edition. Thank you very much for the attention.
Very good evening, Minister Iswaran, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure you've been waiting for me to present the next slide in terms of the ranking this time around. Okay. Yes, you can see on the slides there. I hope that's also appears here. In terms of the ranking, Singapore retained its position for the 5th consecutive time within this research. And only Singapore retained its position. There were changes in the remaining 4 cities. Rotterdam moving 1 level up to be 2nd. London 2 levels up, moving to 3rd position. Shanghai 2 levels up, moving to the 4th position. And the all-rounder, we see this time, Tokyo. Actually, it moves 3 levels up to be in the 5th position. So as we can see, as we mentioned earlier by my colleague Eric, we did a robust process of looking at 29 objective indicators and 11 subjective indicators based on the expert assessment. So I will run through for each of the 5 pillars in terms of the score for the various cities. Athens, being one of the world's largest shipping hub, huge number of owners. In terms of the fleet size and the fleet value, it far outstripped any other cities. In fact, in the fleet value, Athens scored almost double compared to Singapore. Singapore retained its position, or I would say Singapore had a position of 2nd, even though in terms of the fleet size, Singapore is almost similar to Tokyo. However, when you look at other factors, particularly the ship management, the size of the ship management activities in Singapore is more than double compared to Tokyo, even though the fleet ownership is the same. This is a clear reflection of Singapore's position as also the hub for ship management and reflect the Singapore's attractiveness within this area. Next, you have Tokyo. Like I said, Tokyo, in terms of the fleet size, is similar to Singapore, but in terms of the fleet value, is a lot more than Singapore. Asian powerhouse, Shanghai, now among these top 4 with regards to the shipping center. And Hamburg used to be, as I said, the hub in Europe, managed to retain at least the number 5 position. So when we look at some of these objective and subjective indicators, here you can see in terms of the market value, I mentioned earlier in terms of Athens, the fleet in Athens. In fact, in the last 2 years itself, the fleet of the owners in Athens increased by almost 20%. Then when you look at the fleet value, it's almost more than double of the next one as Tokyo. And then you have then the Hamburg and Shanghai in terms of the fleet value in the 3rd and 4th position. But the good thing, at least for Singapore, is then that as a shipping center, in terms of one of the questions being asked, which is the leading shipping centers of the world, you can see then that Singapore far outstripped the next location, that is London, and followed by Athens. So Singapore, being an attractive shipping center, managed to retain its perception with regards to the expert, and this is similar in the past publication. Then when we look at maritime finance and law, New York is clearly leading. And in fact, in all of the 5 indicators, New York is the only city in US that is among the top 5. Because New York, out of the 8 objective indicators, 6 of them, New York is either number 1 or number 2. So it managed to retain a high score in terms of this maritime finance and law. The next favorite is London. London being still the maritime law hub of the world, leading number 1 by all accounts, as well as number 1 for maritime insurance. Then in Asia, Tokyo being the only city in Asia that is among the top 5 in maritime finance and law, followed by Oslo and Paris, having still a sizable activities within the maritime finance. Here is just illustration. You can see on the vertical axis is the number of listed maritime companies. On the horizontal axis, and on the vertical axis is the asset or is the valuation of the company. So on the top right hand is actually New York. So in terms of maritime finance for New York, I don't think so that any other city could overtake its position in the next few years. And in the center there is actually Hong Kong, followed by Shanghai within the maritime value as well as the size of this stock exchange for maritime companies. The next, maritime technology. In terms of objective indicators, even though Singapore do not score very high on the shipyards or shipbuilding activities, however, the investment on digital transformation, investment on innovative startup ecosystem, and the recent serious focus on the green transition have helped Singapore moving into pole position, number 1, for the first time in maritime technology. Similarly with Singapore's Oslo. Oslo do not have a shipbuilding, call it a large shipbuilding capacity or capability, but yet, it can score high. Similarly, because Oslo, we know they are very strong on maritime technology, on maritime innovation. So in terms of expert assessment, Oslo is really close to Singapore, but in terms of the green transition, Oslo in fact is slightly higher than Singapore. Number 3 in maritime technology is Busan, being the shipbuilding powerhouse in this region. Then followed by London as well as Shanghai. So that's for maritime technology. And okay. So I mentioned earlier in terms of the shipbuilding capacity, and here we're specifically looking at location or city focusing on the new green transition, low carbon intensive fuel. Busan is clearly way ahead compared to the next city, that is Shanghai. And particularly Busan have been building a lot of ships with alternative fuel, particularly for LNG as fuel. And one of the things that also being measured in the objective indicators is number of patents produced by the firms in the city. And here Seoul is clearly leading as well as Rotterdam. However, in terms of the expert assessment, like what was mentioned earlier by Eric, we have close to 300 people worldwide. And one of the questions was about the city that is leading on the green transition. Here, Oslo has been number 1 in this ranking last year, similarly to this year. But this year you can see then that Singapore is really closely behind Oslo. And I guess one of the key reasons is then that the effort that has been taken by the Singapore ecosystem, particularly by SMF, having this IAP for decarbonization, and in addition to having that industry advisory panel, is then that to implement some of the recommendation, and one of the key part is the Global Center for Maritime Decarbonization. So these are areas that have been received very well by the industries globally, and you can see then that Singapore ranked very close to Oslo with regards to the green transition. However, when we look at city with the biggest capabilities, strongest capabilities for digital transformation, Singapore is way ahead compared to its peers. Again, congratulations to the Singapore ecosystem for putting a lot of effort, investment, and focus towards getting the whole ecosystem to move ahead on this digital journey. Next, on port and logistics. Shanghai is leading in this case. And the reason is the port volume for Shanghai is way ahead compared to others. Besides the port volume, is also the port operators that are located in Shanghai, in terms of the volume that they handle globally, as well as the liner shipping connectivity index, which Shanghai is slightly ahead compared to Singapore. And next, Rotterdam. Actually, when we look at the score, Rotterdam and Singapore, they are very close together. But one of the edge that Rotterdam may have is then that it has invested a lot earlier on the green transition within the ports. So when you look at in terms of availability of LNG or even bio-LNG, Rotterdam have started the journey much earlier, and Singapore obviously is following behind. Hong Kong is number 4, and Guangzhou number 5. This again is a reflection about South China in terms of the cargo volume that led in terms of the total capacity and throughput going out from these southern Chinese ports. Here I mentioned again earlier, with regards to the volume, Guangzhou and Shanghai, they are neck to neck in terms of volume, showing in terms of the Chinese cities being the factory of the world, followed by Singapore. And on the right side there, when you look at LNG bunkering availability, Rotterdam is way ahead due to, let's say, its early start to establish the LNG and alternative fuel bunkering facilities. Overall attractiveness and competitiveness. Singapore retains its position. In fact, Singapore is the only city that is in the top 5. One of the objective indicators is about ease of doing business. So clearly Singapore is number 1 there. The other one is about transparency. Singapore is number 2. I think Copenhagen is number 1. So overall, Singapore continues to maintain its lead. And this is an important indicator because, as what was mentioned by Eric, companies who are in that location, like in Singapore, you are wanting to retain here because of the city attractiveness. Likewise, the ability for a city to attract companies from outside, it depends on its attractiveness. And in that regards, Singapore has scored well, followed by London, Copenhagen, Rotterdam, and Oslo. North European as well as Scandinavian cities taking the position after Singapore. And then with that, we have the overall ranking. Overall ranking, like what you see earlier. Singapore being ranked as the top, followed by Rotterdam as the gateway. For Europe, you have London and the Asian powerhouse of Shanghai as well as Tokyo. There's a lot of details within the report. The report is available for download. In fact, for some of you that have participated in this survey, I think anytime now you will get an email, I think with the copy of the report. And for us, we really look forward to continue to engage with the maritime ecosystem here, as well as worldwide. And we hope that this has been, at least within the audience here, pleased with regards to the result. And we look forward to continue with the discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Osman and Dr. Jacobson. Ladies and gentlemen, before we conclude the program, I would like to invite the SMF board members who have begun their new term of office this year on stage for group photo taking. Due to safe management measures, this will be done in 2 groups. The SMF board comprises of leaders across the spectrum of the maritime ecosystem. The board plays a pivotal role in setting SMF's strategic directions across the key pillars of connectivity, innovation, and talent. The SMF board members who have been reappointed are Mr. Simon Quick, Vice President and Head of Research and Development, Secretariat, Sustainability Council of Sembcorp Marine. Next we have Mr. Nick Potter, General Manager, Shipping and Maritime, APME Region, Shell Eastern Trading. You can stand in the... Next we have Mr. Ong Kim Pong, Regional Chief Executive Officer, Southeast Asia, PSA International. Next, Mr. Chua San Lai, Chief Human Resource Officer, Sembcorp Marine. Next, Mr. Prem Gurbani, Arbitrator, Mediator and Counsel, Prem Gurbani. Next, we have Ms. Hua Lei Hun, Chief Executive, Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore. Next, we have Ms. Caroline Yang, Chief Executive, Hong Lam Marine. I would now like to invite Mr. Hall, who is beginning his term as the new SMF Chairman, on stage. Lastly, I would like to invite Minister Iswaran to join us for this group photo taking. Minister, Chairman and Board members, you may unmask for the photo taking. Thank you, board members. You may now return to your seat, and a gentle reminder to please wear your mask. Minister and Chairman, please remain on stage. This year, SMF also welcomes 4 new members to the board. They are Mr. John Martin, Chief Executive Officer, GUARD Singapore. Next, we have Mr. Lars Kostrup, Co-President and Executive Director, Pacific International Lines. Next, we have Ms. Angeline Teo, Managing Director and Head, Global Transportation and Offshore, OCBC Bank. And lastly, we have Mr. Cyril Ducor, Chief Executive Officer, Eastern Pacific Shipping. You may unmask for the group photo. Thank you, Minister, Mr. Hall and board members. You may be seated. In adherence to the safe management measures, please remember to mask up. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the event. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Minister, for gracing the 2022 SMF New Year Conversations. May I now invite Minister Iswaran to take your leave. Following safe management measures, we will be departing in zones, beginning with Zone 2, followed by Zone 1, then Zone 3. Best wishes for the prosperous and smooth sailing year ahead. Thank you.